What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. My name is GemmaJade, but today we are going to be discussing the strange vanishing of Bryce Laspisa. We've discussed so many strange and seemingly random disappearances here on this channel throughout the years, and I've also covered so many in my book series called Gone Mysterious Disappearances, of which there are now 5 volumes. However, I was recently reminded of a case I researched a long time ago and was fascinated by, but that I never covered for whatever reason with a video, and I'm pretty sure it's not in any of those 5 volumes of that book series either. I decided that now would be the perfect time to talk about this disappearance and the incredibly odd behavior that preceded it. I honestly have no real answers as to what happened to or became of Bryce Laspisa, but I figured I could at least throw some ideas and opinions out there and talk some about the theories and rumors that surround this case. Also, I love to hear your opinions on things like this because you all have such different perspectives sometimes, and it's so wonderful to have an open discussion in the comments. This case stands out to me mainly because of the strange way Bryce was behaving just before he seemingly vanished off the face of the earth, and it's still unsolved to this day. Without further ado, I will tell you all about the days and weeks leading up to this strange disappearance, and I hope you all are as interested in and fascinated by this case as I am. So without anything else, let's jump right in. In 2013, Bryce Laspisa seemed to have had a lot going for him, with a bright future ahead of him. He just graduated from high school in Chicago, Illinois, and after moving to California with his parents, he enrolled in Sierra College, where he studied graphic and industrial design, and he flourished in this new environment. Bryce was naturally artistic, and he was very talented. He did well in his classes, and he made friends easily due to his easygoing nature and charming demeanor. He also met a new girlfriend while in college, and her name was Kim Sly. Yes, things seemed to be going incredibly well for Bryce, and for all intents and purposes, he seemed no different than any other well-adjusted college student, just living the life of a young adult who was responsible and willing to work hard to achieve his goals and to make his dreams come true. His first year of college seemingly flew by, and he was well on his way to making something great of his life and doing something he loved to do for a living. There were no signs, and certainly there was no reason for anyone to ever think that this was all merely the calm before the storm, and that Bryce was about to become the center of a shocking and bizarre mystery that's still unsolved to this day. The summer after his first year of college, Bryce went to visit his parents in Laguna Niguel, California, and while there he was seen behaving normally, with his parents saying he was very excited to get back to school. During that vacation, nothing out of the ordinary had happened, and there were no signs of what was about to happen either. Not too long after returning to school, though, Bryce's whole demeanor and personality drastically changed. There was an incredibly strange shift in his behavior as well, and no one could understand what had happened that could have caused him to be behaving so bizarrely and acting so far out of character. At first, only his girlfriend and a couple of his closest friends noticed that anything was off or different about him. It started off subtle, with Bryce's normally cheerful and friendly disposition turning sullen and seemingly depressed most of the time. He became uncharacteristically morose and withdrawn. He started having strange mood swings, and that's when most people would say he started behaving very much unlike his usual cheery self. This odd behavior quickly escalated and turned into constant drinking, which was concerning to everyone who knew him, because before this point, he really didn't like to drink much, if at all. His roommate and friend, whose name was Sean Dixon, explained that Bryce had started drinking hard liquor every single night, and that he always ended up drinking to the point of blacking out and passing out. This shocked those closest to him, and they were obviously very, very worried about him and wondering what in the world was going on with him. To add more worry to the situation, his closest friends found out that he'd started taking a medication called Vyvanse recently, which is an amphetamine derivative that's mainly used to treat people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. This particular medication comes with some pretty severe side effects, which include but are not limited to psychosis, depression, and even mania. This was very dangerous, especially since Bryce wasn't being prescribed this medication by a doctor, and in fact, as far as anyone knew, he didn't even have ADHD. When his concerned friends would ask him about why he was abusing prescription medications and drinking all the time, he would shrug it off as though it were no big deal and explain that he just took it so that he would be able to stay awake for longer stretches of time in order to play video games and sometimes to study. However, his friends didn't buy this explanation, and they were extremely concerned. As his behavior seemingly continued to unravel, and become more erratic by the day, his friends and family started to think that perhaps something in Bryce's life had gone terribly wrong and that he was drinking and taking this medication in an attempt to cope with whatever it was. However, he insisted time and time over and over again that he was fine, and he absolutely refused to discuss the matter further with anyone, despite how scared and upset everyone was about this situation and the way he was behaving. Bryce insisted that everything was fine and that his friends and family were absolutely overreacting. On August 27, 2013, Bryce broke up with his girlfriend by email, telling her that she was much better off without him, and he also sent his best friend and roommate Sean a message that read, quote, "I love you, bro. Seriously. You are the best person I've ever met. You saved my soul," end quote. The same day he sent the email, he gave Sean his beloved Xbox and all of his video games, and he also gave away a very expensive pair of diamond earrings that his mother had previously given to him as a gift, and he loved these earrings. They were one of his most favorite possessions, as was the Xbox. 2 days later, on August 29th, Bryce called his mother Karen and told her that he had a lot he needed to discuss with her and talk to her about, and that he was planning on driving to her home for a visit. Bryce gave her no more details and no inkling about what in the world was so important that he couldn't just speak with her over the phone, but had to go all the way out there to see her in person. Keep in mind, this was only a couple of weeks before school was supposed to start again, and he'd literally just gotten back a week or two before this all happened. Bryce Laspisa got into his car at around 11:30 at night on the 29th and drove off, not knowing he was heading directly into the next chapter of this bizarre disappearance story. The next morning at around 9 a.m., Bryce ran out of gas just outside of the town of Buttonwillow, which is approximately 200 miles north from where his parents lived in Laguna Niguel. He made his way to a rest area and called for roadside assistance. He was brought enough gasoline to continue to the nearest gas station, but Bryce didn't continue on his way. By the time all of this happened, Karen Laspisa had been unsuccessfully trying to reach her son by calling him for an entire 3 hours and getting no response from him at all. He wasn't picking up the phone, he wasn't calling her back, and these were very, very unusual behaviors for Bryce as well. In fact, the calls all went directly to voicemail, and Karen was worried enough that she called the roadside service company who had just brought Bryce his gasoline, and she begged the man to go back to where he'd met Bryce and check on him. The attendant was initially reluctant, but he eventually agreed to help this very worried mother out. And when he arrived back at the place where he'd initially given Bryce the gas hours and hours before, he was able to tell him he needed to call his mother because Bryce was still sitting there. Bryce called Karen and told her not to worry and that he merely needed some sleep and was staying there on the roadside in order to take a quick nap. He said he would continue on his way to her house shortly. Hours passed, and not only did Bryce never show up at his parents' house, but he wasn't answering or returning any calls either. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around on the same night as when he'd had to call for assistance earlier in the day, his parents were beyond concerned. So he called for the assistance. Then the guy went back. He spoke to his mother. Bryce spoke to his mom and said he'd be on his way shortly. This is that same night. His parents knew that he should have definitely arrived by then, and his mother went and reported him as a missing person. Karen filed the missing persons report with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and it turns out they didn't have to look very far to find Bryce. He was still sitting in that same spot on the side of the road where he'd been earlier that morning when he had run out of gas and had spoken to his mother about just simply needing a little rest. He was still sitting in the car and had been there for about 9 hours at that time. Because of the strangeness of the situation, the officers thought that perhaps Bryce was under the influence of alcohol or drugs of some sort, but not only was there no evidence to back those suspicions up, Bryce passed a breathalyzer test and a field sobriety test with flying colors, according to the officers on scene that night. When asked what he was doing still sitting out there like that, Bryce told the police that he was on his way to meet a friend and, quote, blow off some steam, end quote. He gave no real reason why he'd been sitting in that rest area all day long, though, but the officers had no real reason to detain him either. After all, he hadn't broken any laws, and the only reason they'd been there questioning him in the first place was because his mother had reported him as missing. The authorities eventually left him there, merely letting him know that his mother was incredibly worried about him and that he probably should turn his phone back on so that she could get in touch with him if necessary. The hours continued to tick by, and 4 hours later, the same roadside service company went out to that same rest area to check. And sure enough, Bryce was still in the exact same spot he'd been for around 13 hours now at that point. This time, though, that same attendant was able to convince him to move along on his way to his parents' house, more than likely once again explaining that his mother was incredibly worried about him. Bryce sat in that car without moving, or at least that's what it seemed like, for more than 13 hours at that point, doing absolutely nothing and not answering his phone. If you think all of this is bad, things are about to get a lot weirder. I will say this. I saw in several sources that it was Karen Laspisa who once again called the roadside service company and asked that same attendant, the one who brought Bryce the gas, to see if he was still there. So I saw that the reason the attendant had gone back the second time and convinced him to move along is because she'd called. But I also saw, so I'm not sure if that's the case or if it's the other sources that are correct, because they say that the attendant was merely thinking about the situation, how odd it is, how worried the mother was. And so he swung by on his way home. Each of those facts is reported more than a few times, and each seems entirely plausible. But regardless of why the attendant went back there, we only know that he did, and that Bryce told him he was leaving and moving on to his parents' house. I just want to put that in there because sometimes in the comments people try to get little gotcha moments on me. I don't know exactly how things happen. I can only go by what the sources tell me, and there was a little bit of conflict there, but it's not a huge, majorly important detail. Bryce called his parents a few hours later and told his mother that he was on his way and that his GPS was saying he would be arriving at their home at around 3:25 a.m. the following morning. He told his parents at that time that he didn't really know where he was and therefore couldn't really confirm his location for them. A little more than an hour after he told them in that call he'd be arriving, so somewhere around 4:30 that same morning, Bryce called his parents again and this time said he was pulling over to rest along Interstate 5 in the Sierra Pelona Mountains. He promised his worried and distraught at this point mother that he would call her later on in the morning, but this would be the last time anyone would ever hear from Bryce Laspisa. That same morning, between 4:20 and 5:15 a.m., law enforcement officials conducting a training exercise found Bryce's car at Castaic Lake, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The car looked like something had happened to it and like it had been through some sort of rough ordeal or something, as it had tumbled 15 feet down a steep ravine just a few hundred feet from Lake Hughes Road. Inside the vehicle, the officers found Bryce's wallet, laptop, cell phone, and some clothes, but there were no signs of a struggle anywhere, and no blood was found in or around the vehicle either. It was a strange and eerie scene, to say the least. Surveillance footage in the area showed that at 2:15 that morning, Bryce had turned onto an access road rather than pulling off to the roadside on the interstate to take a nap, as he had told his mother he intended to do. Around 2 hours later, at 4:29 a.m., the same camera photographed his car driving by the same area again, but after that, it's unknown what happened to him. Somewhat bizarrely, it was later found that the vehicle had more than likely accelerated down the embankment, meaning a human being had still been in control of the vehicle when this happened. There was also some damage to the rear window that suggested a tool had been used to break the glass from the inside, more than likely in order to exit the vehicle. No one understood any of the evidence or what in the world could have happened from there. A massive and major search was launched using divers to search the lake and aircraft, and tracker dogs even managed to find Bryce's scent and follow it to a nearby truck stop. The dogs lost the scent at the truck stop, and it seems as though he just vanished into thin air while there. Of course, there's been the usual sightings that we always see in these types of cases, but none of them have ever been confirmed, and so I'm not going to really discuss them here with you all today because they all inevitably led to a dead end. Also, there was a skull found in the woods nearby to where he was last known to have been and where his car crashed, as well as a body found in the lake, all of this years later. And while everyone was hopeful in a way that it would be Bryce or there could be some closure to this mystery, none of it turned out to have had anything to do with him at all. Over the years, this case has remained ice cold with no real evidence, clues, or leads ever coming up. Investigators have been absolutely stumped at every turn, and speculation is rampant as to what could have possibly happened to Bryce Laspisa. Some of these theories are the usual, with people saying that perhaps he disappeared on purpose to run off and start a new life somewhere, but that's never been proven, and his family and those closest to him adamantly deny that he would ever have done such a thing. It is possible, and this theory has been discussed at length, that the mixture of alcohol and medication he was taking caused some sort of psychotic break or fugue state in Bryce, and that due to this, he lost his mind for all intents and purposes, crashed his car, and wandered off to get lost in the dense woods surrounding the area where his car was eventually found and where he'd last been seen on surveillance footage. However, The police spoke to him. They gave him field sobriety tests. They gave him a breathalyzer. If he had seemed impaired or incapacitated in any way, considering he was a missing person, all of the strange details, I think even if they didn't arrest him, tow his car, or do anything like that, I think at the very least they would have put in their report that he seemed like he was in some kind of a trance or fugue state, or he seemed intoxicated even though he'd passed the sobriety test. As far as I found, there's nothing like that. It says he was just normal. It was just he was in a weird situation, but he wasn't behaving erratically or speaking strangely or anything like that. Another theory that's entirely plausible given the circumstances surrounding this strange case is that something happened to him at the truck stop where the dogs tracked his scent to. Maybe he was abducted and due to his mental state at the time ended up being a target for a serial killer in the area at the time, or some other nefarious person for any other reason. However, none of these theories or any others I've ever come across even come close to addressing or explaining every one of the weird things about this case. The questions and weird clues surrounding this case are many, and nothing has ever come close to explaining it all entirely. I think it's possible that whatever happened to him could have had to do with whatever he was seemingly so desperate to speak to his mother about that he decided to travel to her home in the middle of the night. It seems as though, at least in my opinion, that the excessive drinking and misuse of prescription medication, which were so far out of the norm and out of character for him, were triggered by something very bad that happened to him that he never told anyone. Something extremely traumatic, more than likely. I'll let MU end this one for me as they put it all together so perfectly. They said, quote, why had his behavior changed so dramatically in the days after summer vacation had ended? What prompted him to suddenly drive off to visit his parents? And why did he stay at that rest area for 13 hours even when he had gas? Why is it that he kept turning off his phone? What was the meaning of his vehicle passing by the camera twice and going off onto the access road? And how did his car end up at the bottom of that ravine? Where did he go after that, and why did he leave all of his belongings behind, especially his phone, that he could have easily used to call for help? What in the world happened to him? There are no solid answers to any of these questions, no new clues have come in, and it seems more and more likely with every passing year that the strange disappearance of Bryce Laspisa will never be solved, end quote. Let me know what you all think in the comments and whether or not you've heard of this case before, what you think about it, ideas, theories, anything I missed. I don't think I covered it in my books, like I said, but that wasn't intentional, and you can bet that I will be using it for Gone Volume 6 sometime in the near future. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed hanging out with me, spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you aren't already. Please, 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 please make sure you leave a comment of at least 7 characters or more in the comment section. The description box has some important links, ways to donate to the channel, which is basically the only way I get paid right now. PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link. Join me on my other social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Please, it's either GemmaJade or GemmaJadeYT. Also in the description box, you will find links for the Kindle, paperback, and Audible versions of all 14 of my books. If you can't find the link you're looking for, and probably an easier way to go about getting one of my books, if you have a specific one in mind, or even just seeing my whole collection, is to go to Amazon and type in GemmaJade Books. For any and all correspondence, for personal intuitive oracle readings, products I sell, other services I offer, full birth chart readings, to send your encounters with the supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, otherworldly, like I said, for any and all correspondence, you have to email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. I do not check PMs, DMs, WhatsApp, TikTok messages, Facebook messages, none of that. I'm only one person. I am on an extremely tight schedule, specifically in the summer with my little guy home. I have 1 day a week I work, and Friday nights when I stream. That is it. That is my free time to do these videos, to do the personal readings, to get other content done. So I'm on a really tight schedule. So the only thing I'm really able to do right now is check email. So reach out through GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Also, guys, thank you to my members, patrons, everyone else who supports me with monthly subscription boxes, with monthly donations for readings, the memberships. I have reactions. I have a lot more coming in the fall, going into winter as well, after summer's over, once I can get back to a full-time, everyday, 5-6 day a week schedule. So thank you guys so much for being so patient, hanging in there, and not withdrawing on me. It means the world to me. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing. You can do anything you want to do to make your dreams come true. Just make sure you're putting actionable steps behind your manifestations and those intentions. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.